violence and insecurity and turmoil, all dealing with COVID lockdowns, BLM, everything going along with that. People were really worked up in 2020. If you see it now in 2024, either from the right, Trump has been indicted and convicted with not that many protests. People are still supporting him, but they don't feel like taking it to the streets. And it's the same with the left. The left doesn't have the type of aggressive, violent demonstrations that they were having in 2020 or even during the Trump years. So I don't really see the 1,000 deaths happening unless the economy completely craters. It's something worse than the Great Recession. Even if it's a very close election, I don't think we're going to see Stop the Steal again. It might be Stop the Steal 2, the direct-to-video version. But even then, I don't know what that would look like. With the left, I don't even think there was going to be that large of the women's marches. They don't seem as activated right now. They're even more resigned that Trump is going to win. There's this awareness that there's a good chance he's going to win. And I think even among a lot of liberals, their gut instinct is saying Trump's going to win. Well, in 2016, they were so outraged and took to the streets because they're like, there's no way this could have ever happened. And then it happened and they lost their minds. So, but you may explain who's doing the killing and who's doing the dying here. And that might explain the situation.
It's hard for me to know where to start because the lore I've established around this is so extensive. I've made like 6 hours of content just on the one Civil War topic. But I operate off probabilistic assessments. And so if you look at, let's say, dominoes or cards or anything, or poker, anything like that, you have probabilistic assessments up to a certain range. And then you don't know the individual events. And that's how I feel about Civil War, where it's one of those things where I know that something's going to happen, and I'm not entirely clear what exact form it will take, and it's highly dependent upon the individual context. And I'm going to use World War I as an example. There were about 15 different places where World War I nearly started before World War I. It was a war that building up for decades, and you happened to get the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and that set up World War I in a way that didn't have to happen, where Britain might not have been involved in the war, America might not have been involved. Hell, there's plenty of timelines where Austria and France were allies against Germany and Russia. Yeah. So that's how I feel about this, where I look at the incentive. I think the right and the left have to have a war. And on the last show I was on here, we talked about...
You mean at like a philosophical level, the divergence between the left and the right precipitates some kind of conflict? You said they have to have some kind of war.
What I meant by that is that the forces of history have built up to the level where it's the only way to solve the equation, where we're at the point where we don't have any other mechanism to solve the underlying issues going on except war. Because you look at, I think there's like 10 issues killing America, between wages being too low, the healthcare system, aging. There's a bunch of these, and Congress isn't going to solve them. And so issues will gradually pile up until you have a war. And I've assessed, I used to have a wider time frame, but I'm making the bet that it's going to start this year for a variety of reasons. And I'm open to being wrong. I make these bets so I'm not just a charlatan making stuff up. But I think it's going to start this year.
I mean, we've got a month and a half, not even. We're about to enter November, so yeah. 2 months. Do you think within this, something's going to kick off? I mean, there are potentialities. Look, the first thing you always got to check is your normalcy bias and your optimism bias.
Yes.
No one saw COVID lockdowns coming. That was outside of the minds of possibility. When I talked to Eric Prince about countries that have collapsed, and I asked him, in your experience with countries that have been these states of turmoil, revolution, civil war, what do you see happening in the United States? He said, the one thing he can tell me is that no one sees it coming. Everybody he's worked with who's been in these countries, one day everything's normal. The next day the internet doesn't work, the power is out, and people are fighting. So how do you actually know when that flashpoint is going to be? Maybe it is November 6th. I wonder. You know, we're looking at the national polls, and I'll actually let me pull these up for you real quick. So this is the national aggregate from yesterday, and we covered this with Kamala Harris in aggregate up nationally 0.2, which is a statistical tie. As of today, Real Clear Polling has a literal tie between Harris and Trump by aggregating all of the existing polls over the past 2 weeks. A tie would indicate a Trump victory because the polls have historically favored Democrats by about 3 to 5 points, and in the battleground states 4 to 7. And I'm going back to 2016. Those are not my numbers. That is not my opinion. That is literally what happened. And if we extrapolate that and apply it to today, Donald Trump may actually win the popular vote by a minimum of 3 points. Who knows? Who knows? Polls change and things change. It's just we're looking at the past to try and predict the future. What happens? You know, everybody's predicting we're not going to know the results until 13 days later or 10 days later because of mail-in voting. But what if Trump wins so handily in early voting and absentee voting that on election day, the big networks say there is no point in waiting any longer for the existing mail-in votes. We know how many there are, and they will not change the outcome. Could that, on November 6th, trigger a leftist reaction? You don't. Let me try and describe it like this. If I were to say right now that tomorrow there will be a 1,000-acre fire wiping out large portions of Appalachia, you'd be like, "What? Wait, wow, is that great?" Yeah, a guy may be driving a truck with a chain dangling off the back, and he makes a sharp turn, whips, snaps the ground, igniting some tinder, and that tiny little fire that no one saw coming explodes into a wildfire where fire is spreading 70 miles an hour across the top of these trees. That is a potentiality. But does that mean it's a high probability? I don't think there's a high probability of wildfires starting, but when they do, how do you stop them? And I suppose what I'm trying to say is to say there's going to be this big grandiose eruption of fire all across California, people are going to be like, well, that's a doomsday scenario. Yeah, but it could really just start from someone flicking a cigarette.
Yes. The calculation I make, and this is one of the weird logical issues in our society, is that a civil war will happen when the civil war is the rational calculation for the players involved. And this is one of the horrible things we don't want to realize, but war is normally a completely rational calculation. I can probabilistically assess that my side will beat your side and we can take your stuff. And I believe the 2024 election is going to set things off because for both sides, they've entered into a position of fundamental weakness where they have an incentive to start a war because it's safer rather than continuing with the peace, because peace is often more dangerous than war. And so for the right and the left, they've pushed their hands too far, and now they need to pull their hands back because they can't survive as things go on. For the right, it's the money printing and the immigration. And those are two things that people have no comprehension how big they are. For money printing, we've added $900 billion to the deficit just since July. And we don't understand how big $900 billion.
Debt, you mean?
Yeah. And that's bigger than a lot of countries in the world. I'm sure someone can look up in the comments and say that's the economy of, like, I don't know, some European country. And so that's the first thing. It took us all of American history to reach the amount of debt we had in 2014, and we've doubled it in the decades since. And the money printing under Biden, it can't go on. It's just killing the economy. And I don't believe the official numbers. I think they're being doctored. I think things are way worse. And so money printing's one. Another 4 years of Biden will destroy society. And then immigration. We've had 15 million illegal immigrants during the Biden administration. That's adding a Pennsylvania to the country. And it's a Pennsylvania overnight without the centuries it took to build up the state. And so 4 years Biden, 15 million more illegal immigrants. And Elon Musk has done a good job talking about this. I really admire Elon Musk's latest stand. And basically, if the Democrats can keep flooding illegals in, they can win a bunch of states if the illegals can vote. So
They don't need to vote.
What do you mean?
Illegal immigrants don't need to vote for Democrats to win control of win the electoral vote and win the presidency and the federal government. So this is actually a big mistake Republicans have made for a very long time in saying that the Democrats are bringing in illegal immigrants so they can vote and vote for Democrats. No, they're not. They're bringing in illegal immigrants so that the census will count them and give them more congressional seats and more electoral college votes. California is estimated to have, at minimum, in the last cycle, one extra vote.
Yeah.
However, If you actually calculate the total illegal immigrant population of California, they may have as many as 10 or 13 extra illegal votes. And let me clarify this.